be the entire focus. That will be the entire focus in the case discussion in any pediatric case. Because though cleft lip, cleft palate is a short case, it's going to hardly take 15-20 minutes to discuss. Questions will also be focused on the basic neonatal as well as the pediatric physiology and how it is going to interact with your anesthetic agents. All right, so you can start today. Have I got Dr. Nishu here?
Yes, sir. Good
Yeah.
evening, sir.
Your volume is a bit low. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, I can hear you, sir.
Right, lovely. You can start, Nishu.
Okay, sir. Sir, I'll share the screen, the presentation, sir.
My screen is not visible there.
No, sir, I cannot see the screen, sir.
Okay, fine. Then you share it. There is a problem in sharing my screen. I don't understand why. Right, you can share your screen then.
Sir, it says host disabled participant screen
Wait,
sharing.
I have to change the settings. I think I have to change the settings. Let me see how to change that. Some issues in my screen sharing. Right, I do one thing. I will share an open screen. Okay. All right. Now you can share a screen now.
Okay, sir. Can you see, sir?
Yeah, it's just starting. Yeah, I can share screen.
Sir, I've shared. Is it visible to everyone? Hello?
Other guys, just respond, guys.
Yes, sir.
Yes, visible.
Yes, we can see.
Yes, sir.
Okay, can I start, sir?
Yeah.
Okay. So, good evening, everyone. This is a case about a 4-month-old girl child residing in Panangat, Kochi. Informant is mother and information is reliable. Her presenting complaints were deformity of left side of upper lip since birth. History of presenting illness, upper lip deformity since birth. History of difficulty in breastfeeding since birth. Sucking was poor and had been on formula feeds. No history of fever, cough, nasal congestion, breathlessness, earache, or ear discharge now. Her mother gives history of recurrent upper respiratory tract infection. Last episode was 1 month back. She was started on antibiotics for the same and now she has recovered. No history of snoring, no history of suggestive of congenital heart disease, epilepsy, or diabetes mellitus.
Okay, so this is basically a pediatric child, which is a 4 months age, coming with the. Can you get your previous screen?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so basically 4 months child who's come with the deformity on the lip from birth. So it's more likely a congenital one, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so and the baby is having difficulty in the breastfeeding, suckling is poor, right? So no history of fever, cough. What are the reason for asking these histories at all?
Sir, since the baby is having poor sucking reflex, she was fed with feeding spoon with formula feed. So there is increased chance of having upper respiratory tract infection, and
Okay,
that is
so
why
you
I've
want to
asked
rule out any active upper respiratory tract infection, isn't
infection.
it?
Yes,
All
sir.
right, so when there is upper lip deformity, there is no proper suckling, so risk of aspiration, risk of your respiratory tract infection is much high. So you're asking for history of fever, cough. Okay, breathlessness. What are the possible reasons of breathlessness in a 4 months old kid?
Uh, Sir, nasal
One is it
congestion,
could be
upper
infection,
respiratory tract.
okay. Upper respiratory tract infection doesn't normally cause breathlessness. What are the reasons which could cause breathlessness in a 4 months old kid?
Lower respiratory tract infection, pneumonia,
Particularly in this kid.
aspiration.
Yeah, one is aspiration, right? So one is lower respiratory tract infection, secondary to upper respiratory tract infection, possible. Fine. Any other reason for breathlessness?
Mm. Aspiration, sir? Aspiration of
Aspiration, fine. Of course, that being part of lower respiratory tract affecting the lower respiratory system, right? Any other reason for breathlessness, which is more important in this type of kids?
mm, I don't
A
know, sir.
4 months old kid, right? So when you're thinking of any congenital problems in pediatric patients, there could be associated cardiac abnormalities which could be happening in any patient with born with congenital abnormalities, isn't it? So
Mm.
if the patient is having an active valve failure like congestive cardiac failure, secondary to either the presenting problem or it might be an associated problem in this type of kids, they could have a breathlessness, right?
Okay, sir.
So not necessarily only respiratory causes need to cause breathlessness in these patients, particularly when the baby is having a congenital deformity. Associated cardiac involvement is very common. So cardiac reasons could be another reason why the baby could have a breathlessness at 4 months age. Okay,
Okay.
right. And then you
Okay.
said earache and ear discharge, and what is that for?
Uh, that is because the of increased risk of upper respiratory tract infection that can get conducted through the eustachian tube and cause ear infection.
Okay, how does the ear infection happens basically? Mechanism of ear infections. How does the ear
Mm.
infection happens basically? All right. So when there is a frequent respiratory tract infection, particularly the upper respiratory tract infections, what happens? The eustachian tube or the nasal ear tube drains into which part of the meatus in the nose? Which part the eustachian tube drains into the nasopharynx?
Middle.
Middle meatus, right?
Okay.
Okay, so what happens when there is frequent respiratory tract infections? What happens, the eustachian tube gets occluded, one eustachian. Secondary to occlusion, what happens? The pressure gets more negative in the middle ear. So that results in the retraction of tympanic membrane. Okay, so
Tympanic
that
membrane.
causes predominantly deafness. Okay, conductive hearing loss. That's the main problem. Second thing is through the eustachian tubes, the microorganisms tend to ascend, and that causes middle ear infection. Right, that's how it happens. So it is
Yes, sir.
primarily the upper respiratory tract infection, which is eventually resulting in the ear involvement. Okay.
Yes.
Good. So fever, cough, or any upper respiratory infection, breathlessness, possibly secondary to lower respiratory tract infection, as well as a cardiac involvement. Earache mainly to rule out ocular involvement in patients with abnormality in the upper lip. Okay.
Yes.
Particularly when the kids are more prone for upper respiratory tract infection. Right. So mother gives history of recurrent upper respiratory tract infection, which is the most common reason why the people present for surgery. Okay. So
Yes.
particularly when there is upper lip, when they have a feeding issues, when they have doesn't have a proper way of swallowing it, they tend to regurgitate, and that is the reason for recurrent respiratory infection. That is the most common reason they present. And he said last episode was 1 month back. She was started on antibiotics for the same anxiety. So since one month back she had infection, last 1 month there is no any active signs of fever, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine, good. Yenny said no history of snoring. What is the purpose of asking snoring in a pediatric child?
Sir, there are certain congenital abnormalities, congenital diseases that tend to have airway problems like
Okay.
Prairie-Robinson syndrome, Treacher-Collins syndrome, and Down syndrome, where they tend to have obstructive sleep apnea. So,
Okay.
history of snoring is important.
All right. So when there is some congenital disorders like Perry-Robin sequence or Treacher-Collins syndrome, what happens basically, the maxillary growth as well as the mandibular growth is a problem in those type of kids. So though the tongue is normal, though the palate is normal, when these kids have a smaller maxilla, smaller mandible, the tongue hasn't got enough space. Okay, it is a pseudo macroglossia, we call in terms. Okay, the tongue per se is a normal size, but because of a low space, it falls back and tend to produce an obstruction. That is one common reason why this type of kids snore. Fine. And he said, now history of congenital heart disease, epilepsy, diabetes. I don't know how significant it is. Right. Any other history you need to ask in the presenting illness? Hello, Nishu, are you there? Hello.
Yes, sir.
What are the history you should have been asked in a baby coming with congenital upper lip abnormality, apart from the things which you have asked? You have asked about the lip issues, which is causing the problem like infections. Fine. Then you
Yes,
have
sir.
asked snoring. So when we have to put for other questions in terms like what is the what can cleft lip can cause to the baby? That is one part of asking history. Second thing is, what are the anomalies which can be associated with the cleft palate or cleft lip? Third is still be focused on complications issued by this cleft lip and cleft palate. So these three segments has to come in your history in the presenting illness. So you said cleft lip can cause URA, fine, that history is there. Cleft lip can cause associated congenital abnormality, which one example of asking those things is history of snoring, which you have asked. Then cleft lip can cause ear infections, which you have asked. What are the things you have missed?
Um,
Whether they have a proper weight gain over the period of last 4 months.
okay, sir.
Okay, that history of weight gain is so important because whether the baby is taking adequate feeds over last 4 months, because that is
Okay.
apart from infection reasons, that is another reason, important reason why the parents get the baby to hospital, right? So because
Yes.
of poor suckling reflex, they don't take proper feeds, that eventually results in nutritional deficiency as well as weight loss. Okay, whether the baby is acquiring proper weight gain from birth, that is important issue, you have to include that, right? Second
Yes.
thing is, these babies tend to become apneic when they feed. Have you asked this history?
No, sir.
That history is important. So history of apnea during feeding, history of snoring, which I have already mentioned, then history of weight gain over the period of last 4, whether the baby is gaining adequate weight. That is important thing. Okay. Then
Yes, sir.
history of sweating in the forehead.
Okay, sir.
Why do you ask the history of
No.
sweating in the forehead?
Um, because they have a poor suckling reflex, they get fatigued uh,
Okay, one is fatigue. Second thing,
while sucking, and second thing is due to some congenital heart disease
yes, when there is a congenital
associated
heart
with the
disease, when there is congenital heart disease, congestive cardiac and failure present with the forehead sweating when they try to feed because they don't properly feed adequately. So, in an attempt to get more nutrition, they tend to they tend to use more of their energy, try to suckle more, eventually result in failing, and that stimulates the sympathetic system and causes the forehead sweating. Okay, that's an important history. So, history of apnea during feeding, history of snoring. Then, if the baby is a grown-up kid, like 1 month or 1 year or 1.5 years old kid, you should have asked about the speech and the hearing abnormality. Okay, because abnormality in the airflow conduction because of the orifice created by the cleft lip or cleft palate can alter your quality of your speech, right? So the speech and the hearing problem are the two important reasons why these kids get operated at an early age. Okay, and then any ocular dental abnormalities for grown-up kids, particularly any teeth growth is appropriate, teeth is inappropriate, any frequent teeth fall is there. So those dental abnormalities has to come in your history of presenting illness. Okay, this case is not needed, but when you're presenting a same case of cleft palate for 1 year, 1.5 years old kid, this history has become mandatory. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we can move on to the next page.
Birth history, antenatal period was uneventful, born by full-term normal vaginal delivery, cried immediately after birth. Birth weight was 2.8 kg, upper lip deformity was present, and there was no history of NICU admission.
Okay,
Feeding
why?
history,
Wait a
suckling
minute.
poor, on
Wait.
formula feeds,
Hang
fed
on.
with the help of a feeding spoon.
Hang on, Nishu.
Immunization history, she is immunized up to age.
Okay, stop. Right? Can you hear me now?
Hello, sir.
Can you listen to me now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Right,
Yes,
fine.
sir.
So you
Yeah.
said birth history, there is no NICU admission, right?
Yes, sir.
What is the reason for asking those things?
Sir, since these babies are born with congenital anomalies, sir.
Okay, fine. You rule
Uh,
out any congenital heart disease at birth, fine. Then
yes.
any other reason for asking NICU admissions at birth? Okay. When the cleft lip or cleft palate is released,
Low birth weights.
but birth weight is 2.8 kgs here, right? So that's not a problem. So when the baby is born with a huge palatal or cleft lip abnormalities or a bilateral cleft lip with a premaxillary deficit, those type of kids, they tend to have their tongue fall very soon, right? So
Yes.
naturally, they tend to have an obstructive breathing at the beginning. Both the brain as well as respiratory system are not mature enough to overcome those breathing issues at the beginning, at the early neonatal phase. So at that time, they tend to have a prone ventilation, or they tend to put the babies in prone so that the tongue falls forward. So that is one of the reason why these type of kids go for NICU admission at the time of birth. Okay. Second thing is severe cases where there is the baby is born with syndromic childs like Perry Robin sequence. What they do is they tend to stitch the tongue with the lip, right? Which is called as the tongue lip fusion surgery. So that is done even at birth sometimes to make sure the patency of the air tract is made clear all the time, because they might be born with a very small mouth that is not sufficient to accommodate the entire tongue. So that type of problems makes them to get admitted in the NICU even at birth for this type of kids, not necessarily cardiac problem or any congenital heart disease. Okay, these are the reasons why this cleft lip cleft palate kids goes for NICU admissions at times. Okay.
Yes, sir.
And what are the important antenatal history you have missed? There's so many things to be asked in the antenatal history. Okay, tell me the risk factors and the for having a cleft lip and cleft palate. What are the environmental and the genetic risk factors of having cleft lip and cleft palate?
And diabetic mothers.
Diabetic mothers, okay, fine. Then some other environmental risk factors. Maternal smoking, right? So maternal smoking and maternal alcohol consumption during the pregnancy period, okay? These are two important environmental risk factors which can precipitate in cleft lip and cleft palate, right? Okay, then usage of teratogenic drugs like thalidomide or anticonvulsants like phenytoin, carbamazepine. These are drugs which can provoke, when you take these drugs in between 4 to 9 weeks of consumption, the chances of having cleft lip and cleft palate is very high. Okay. Then history of maternal infection, particularly viral infections during the antenatal period. So that is another important risk factor having cleft lip and cleft palate. Lastly, nutritional deficiency, vitamin and folic acid deficiency, vitamin A. Okay. Vitamin A deficiency or folic acid deficiencies during the conception period is another risk factor for having cleft lip and cleft palate. Got it? So these are the important history or the antenatal history which should come into your case presentation. Okay. Maternal viral infection, maternal drug intake, and maternal smoking and alcohol abuse, and viral infection during the antenatal period. Okay. And NICU admission, which we spoke already, why the reason they go for ICU admissions, particularly apart from non-cardiac causes. Okay. Good. You said feeding history, suckling is poor, and the baby's on formula feeds, fed with help of spoon feed. Right. Naturally, because of cleft lip or the deformity, they don't suckle properly. Right. Good. Next, move on.
Coming on to the developmental history, head holding is present, turns from side
Okay.
to side
Anything
and back to
significant?
front,
Anything
reaches for
significant? Anything significant in this?
No, sir. She's
Okay, so developmental
developmental.
wise, his brain is fine, so baby has developed appropriately for the age. Fine, lovely. Next.
Past history, the recurrent respiratory tract infection history is there. No
Okay,
history of any surgeries done in the past, and no history of any exposure to anesthesia.
okay,
Personal history, bowel and bladder habits are normal, not on any medications. Family history, no history of similar complaints. Parents had a non-consanguineous marriage, and she's the only child of a parent.
okay, fine. Next.
Hello, sir.
Next slide. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Hello.
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 Other guys, unmute and tell me, can you hear me?
Hello. Yes, sir. Now I can hear, sir. Yes, sir. Hello, sir.
All can hear, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Right, proceed.
General examination. She is an alert, active, playful child. Afebrile veins are visible. No pallor, cyanosis, icterus, lymphadenopathy or edema seen. Vital signs: pulse rate was 120 per minute. Blood pressure 90 and 50 millimeter of mercury. Respiratory rate of 32 per minute. Saturation and room air was 96%. Airway examination: cleft lip present on the left side. No cleft palate, retrognathia or any facial dysmorphism. No macroglossia.
Okay, stop here. All right. So the baby is alert, active, playful. What do you mean by these terms?
Sir, this child, since this child is having a poor suckling reflex, they tend to have failure to thrive
Okay.
condition.
Okay.
So they are not, from this, I want to say that the child is not having failure to thrive and she is active.
Okay,
And
simple, as
second
simple
thing,
as it
there
is.
is no-
Okay, an alert, playful child, it means that you're not telling there is no any active inflammatory focus running on the baby. In other terms, there is no any active infection running. Okay, so that's a main idea of conveying those lines. Okay, when the baby is active, when the baby is alert, not irritable, not crying, not restless. When the baby is active and alert, which means that the baby's homeostasis is good. There is no any active infection or inflammation running on in the body. Okay, that's one important thing, you're conveying that line. And veins are visible. What is the importance of mentioning that? What is the importance of mentioning the veins are visible? Of course, it's a very valid line, but what do you mean by veins are visible?
That means she is adequately hydrated, sir.
Yeah, as simple. Okay, so this baby, this type of babies, because of poor nutritional intake and poor feeding, they tend to be dehydrated very commonly, right? So veins are visible doesn't mean that they are hydrated, but as an indirect way, you can tell that veins are visible just to have on dental examination. Looks like the baby is not that dehydrated, so that the veins are completely collapsed. Okay, good. So no sinuses, no icterus, no lymphadenopathy, edema. You said heart rate of 120 beats per minute, right?
Yes, sir.
Why the heart rate is 120 per minute in this kid? Is it tachycardia? Is it bradycardia by definition?
Um, I don't know, sir.
Okay, so 120 per minute is,
Hello?
yeah,
Yes,
120 per minute is, it's quite normal one, right? For that
Yes,
age
sir.
group, right? So compared to adults, the heart rate in neonates or the pediatric patients is higher. Can you tell me what is the reason?
Sir, they for pediatric they maintain the cardiac output with the heart rate.
Why?
So that is why the
Why?
heart rate is high. To
Why they
maintain.
maintain the cardiac output at the heart rate? How it is different from adults?
In adults, due to the contractility of the heart, the cardiac output is maintained. But in pediatrics, uh, with the contractility of the myocardium is not developed.
Okay,
So
so
they
mainly
maintain the cardiac output.
the
with-
myocardium of the pediatric patients tend to have more of connective tissues and less of contractile tissues. Okay, so only as they grow up, the connective tissues are replaced by contractile tissues. Since there is more of connective tissue, they don't have the ability to stretch and contract like the Frank Starling's mechanism. So naturally, they have a very fixed stroke volume. So which means they are easily prone for dehydration as well as easily prone for cardiac overload. So they have a very narrow margin of safety because of fixed stroke volume. So being cardiac output is nothing but the heart rate multiplied by stroke volume. When the one component is fixed, naturally the other component has to go up. So that is why the heart rate is going to be on a higher range as the kids mature and mature, as the myocardium becomes more and more contractile, as the connective tissues are more and more replaced by the contractile tissues, the heart develops the ability to stretch and contract and incorporate the Frank-Starling's mechanism. The dependency on heart rate comes down. Okay, so which system is well developed in pediatric patients? Sympathetic nervous system or parasympathetic nervous system?
Sympathetic nervous system.
Are you sure?
Yes, sir.
It is a parasympathetic system. Okay, don't mention this. This is a very blunder. Don't do this mistake in the exam. Okay. Pediatric patients sympathetic system takes 8 to 12 years to get completely matured as an adult. All right, parasympathetic system is completely matured when they are born. So then you can ask me, if the parasympathetic system is more dominant, why there is tachycardia, not bradycardia? Because parasympathetic system tend to produce bradycardia, but these kids are not bradycardic, mainly to, as I said, cardiac output is rate dependent. In order to work on the fixed stroke volume, the body tone tends to have a higher heart rate. So that is why when there is any insult to the body, like hypovolemia or hypoxia, hypocarbia, any insult to the body, these kids respond not by tachycardia but by bradycardia, because the sympathetic system is not well developed. So in adults, when there is extreme hypotension or extreme hypovolemia, what do we do? We tend to produce tachycardia as a part of sympathetic response. So those sympathetic response are lost in the pediatric patients. Since the parasympathetic system is well developed, any insult to the body, they depict as bradycardia and not tachycardia. Okay,
Okay, sir.
good. Respiratory rate is 32 per minute, right? So what do you mean by the term 32 per minute? Is this tachypneic or normal rate or bradypneic?
Sir, below 40 is normal for.
Okay, so compared to adults, their respiratory rate is very high. And can you tell me why? Why the respiratory rate of kids is much higher?
Respiratory muscles also not.
Why the respiratory rate is very high in pediatric patients? I'm asking a very, very simple question.
Increase metabolism.
Increased metabolism. So what does it relate with the respiratory system?
Increase carbon dioxide production. So oxygen
because
demand
of
will be
increased
high.
metabolism, because of increased carbon dioxide production, and that is causing increased respiratory rate. Fine, but the ventilatory response to carbon dioxide is not well developed in units, right?
Yes, sir.
So then why do you have a higher rate? See, these are all very, very basic physiology questions which you
The
have
chest
to.
wall complaints will be more than the lung complaints. So
Okay.
The minute ventilation is respiratory rate dependent, not
Why it is respiratory rate dependent?
because respiratory muscles are not proper contractile
Respiratory
strength.
muscles are not proper contractile. Any other reasons?
Lung
Something
compliance,
related to muscle fibers, type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers. Sir.
No.
lung compliance.
Why the lung compliance? What is the issue in the lung compliance? What is basically the problem in the pediatric lungs compared to other lungs? All right, fine, relax. So when you're asked this question, right, when you're asked why the respiratory rate is high in the pediatric patients, why the baby tend to desaturate faster, every question has got only same answer, right? First of all, their airway tracts are very small, okay? The airway tracts are very small. When the airway tracts are very small, the amount of air which is going to coming in is going to be very less, okay? So in order to compensate for a less flow rate, they have to breathe very fast, first thing. Second thing, the number of alveoli. Okay, there are 120 million alveoli in adults. Okay, whereas it's only one half in the neonates or the pediatric patients. It takes months to mature. So number of alveoli is less, and the alveoli compliance is very poor. They are very stiff. They don't have much elasticity as the adult alveoli because there are a lot of connective tissues and less contractile tissues, similar to cardiac muscles. Okay. So less number of alveoli, low compliant alveoli, more connective tissues. Next, the surface area of alveoli is very less. Okay, when there are more alveoli and more foldings, the surface area available for gas exchange is high. Whereas when there are less number of alveoli, the surface area is going to be very less. So when the surface area is very less, lung is not a good organ for gas exchange when there is a rapid demand. Next thing. Next thing is the compliance of the chest wall. The chest wall is highly compliant, lung compliance is very poor. Both are in opposite direction, right? Next thing, the ribs are not a good in proper alignment compared to adults, because in adults it is an oblique arrangement, whereas in pediatric and neonate patient it is a parallel arrangement. So when there is a parallelly oriented ribs, what happens? This bucket handle movements is lost, right? So there is no added advantage of chest wall to increase the tidal volume. So that's only way to depend only on the respiratory rate. Next thing, the respiratory muscles are not good enough to overcome the fatigue. They are not fatigue resistant fibers. Predominantly the type 1 fibers which are more fatigue resistant are much less. It's only 10%, whereas in adults it is 25%. So it takes time to get more amount of fatigue resistant type 1 muscle fibers. Next thing, alveolar ventilation is very high compared to adults body weight. Okay, then the alveolar ventilation to functional residual capacity ratio, which is 5:1 in a neonate, whereas it is only 1.5:1 in an adult. Last thing, the demand for oxygen is more because they are highly metabolic. So these are the reasons why the babies tend to have a rapid respiratory rate. These are the reasons why the babies tend to desaturate very faster. These are the reasons why the baby tend to have faster inhalational induction. Unmute and tell me whether you're able to understand this thing.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Yes, sir.
So starting from the airway tract size to the gas exchange in the cellular level, so many reasons are there why the baby tend to be tachypneic. Do you got the point?
Yes, sir.
So tell it in an order way. So someone asking me alveolar ventilation ratio, right? So alveolar ventilation into FRC ratio, right? Basically, when the alveolar ventilation to FRC ratio is very high, for example, if you are ventilating very fast, whereas the contribution of functional residual capacity in that total alveolar ventilation is very less, what happens? Their basic oxygen reserve is very poor. That's the meaning of alveolar ventilation and FRC ratio, right? So if the baby is ventilating for 5 liters, only 1 liter will be a part of functional residual capacity. So that is 5:1. Whereas in adults, if it is ratio is 1.5:1, which means when the alveolar ventilation is 5 liters, nearly 3 to 3.5 liters will be there as a part of functional residual capacity. So that's the difference between pediatric patients and adult patients. So that's what I meant alveolar ventilation FRC ratio. It is 5:1 in neonates and 1.5:1 in adult patients. Okay.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
So what is the ideal respiratory rate when you ventilate a child?
Okay.
How do you calculate it?
The baby's normal respiratory rate is the rate you have to ventilate under anesthesia. In fact, you can ventilate much lesser because under anesthesia, your metabolic rate is going to go down. Okay. So when the metabolic rate is go down, your demand at the cellular level is going to less, right? So you can ventilate the baby depending upon your end-tidal concentration. So targeting between 35 to 45, whichever rate is accommodating, you can ventilate at that rate, because the tidal volume when you're putting an artificial ventilation is not going to be fixed. Okay. when you're manually ventilating the kid, you're not going to produce the same tidal volume in each rate. So when the tidal volume is varying, naturally the respiratory rate is also going to vary. So eventually you have to keep a target either on minute ventilation or on the set end tidal concentration of carbon dioxide, which you're focusing for. You got the point?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, lovely. So all the reasons you understood, right? Why respiration is completely different, and what are the reasons why the baby is tachypneic compared to adults. So when the baby grows up, the alveoli goes increase in number as well as increase in the size. Next thing, the connective tissues are replaced by contractile tissues. Next thing, the surface area is increasing. Okay. Next thing, the airway tract is going to have a bigger diameter, so there can be the ease of flow of gas is going to be much better. Last thing, the respiratory muscles are going to get more matured. Then the ribs, as the body and the vertebral column grows, the ribs are going to get more oblique, so that can help in the bucket handle movement. Muscles get matured, peripheral metabolism going to come down, so demand is going to be less. As the alveoli is expanding, the FRC is increasing. So naturally, the alveolar ventilation FRC ratio drops down. So these are the reasons why we have a lower respiratory rate in adults compared to pediatric patients. Got the point?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Good, lovely. So there is the main abnormalities. There's a huge cleft lip. So what is the type of cleft lip? Is it a complete one or an incomplete one? How far is the extension of cleft lip?
Sir, this was an incomplete one, sir. It was not extending up to the nasal.
Okay, so it's just an incomplete cleft lip, not extending up to the nasal floor, right?
Yes, sir.
And it is unilateral, which is on the left side.
Left side.
Can you tell me how do you classify cleft lip?
Cleft lip is classified as complete and incomplete, sir.
Okay.
Or
Unilateral or bilateral?
Unilateral or bilateral cleft lip. Okay, unilateral or bilateral cleft lip, complete and incomplete cleft lip. So these are the two simple classification for cleft lip. How the cleft palate is classified?
cleft palate is also classified as complete or incomplete, or partial or complete. Incomplete and partial cleft lip, sir.
Incomplete or partial cleft lip? No. Okay, so basically cleft lip involving only the uvula. Okay, it's a bifid uvula. That's the first basic thing. Second thing is cleft lip involving the soft palate. In most severe cases, it involves the hard palate. Okay, so this is one way of classifying. So, and the last type is the submucosal cleft, where means there is only bony deformity, whereas the mucosa is intact. There is another classification like pre-palatal and the post-palatal, depending upon the location of the palatal defect. Either if it is anterior to the incisive foramen, it is called as pre-palatal. If it is posterior to the incisive foramen, it is called as post-palatal or the secondary palate. All right. So these are the classification existing for cleft palate. Good. Move on to the next slide.
Head to toe examination. Skull shape was normal. Fontanelles were closed. Hair was black. No change in color.
Okay. What is
Eyes,
the peculiarity of skull in neonates and adults? Can you give a comparison of the skull?
one thing, the fontanelles will be open till 18 months. It completely closes in 18 months.
Okay.
And on palpating, while in adults, it is not there. In neonates, on palpating the fontanelles, we can assess the whether the child is dehydrated or
Okay.
adequately hydrated. If the fontanelles are depressed, that means his child is dehydrated.
Okay.
And the suture lines will be open in
Okay. Skull wall is
not
going to be more
completely.
compliant. Okay, more compliant, and it is flexible, so they tend to have raised ICP as soon as an adults have. Fine. Then important, anesthetically more significant.
there will be increase in size of the head when there is an increase in intracranial pressure.
Okay, that's quite normal because the sutures are not closed, right? That's what we discussed already. Something more significant for the anesthetist. Why specifically I'm just asking about this size of the skull in neonates compared to adults? That must be some reason, isn't it?
The size of the head is more compared to the body surface area in neonates.
Yeah, when you compare to the weight, the ratio of head to weight is much higher in the neonates compared to adult patients. Okay, how significant it is? Why it is significant for the anesthetist to know the head weight ratio?
They tend to become more hypothermic if head is not
Okay, so head is a large surface area.
surface area is more.
Good. So head is being a huge, it becomes an important part of greater surface area. And since there is no much soft tissues or fatty tissues over there, so they tend to lose heat. So head is an skull is an important source of heat loss in neonatal patients. Right. Any other reasons? Any other important? Very good. This is a very vital reason. Okay. So they tend to become more hypothermic because of larger size head to weight ratio compared to adults. Then
Second thing, positioning of the child will be difficult as the head is more size is more compared to the
what
body.
positioning is going to be difficult? Is it difficult or anything else?
While intubating, sniffing position is not done. It is usually done in a neutral position.
Okay, why it is done in neutral position?
With lifting the
Why it is done in neutral position and
shoulder.
not compared to adults? All these have got a lot of clinical relevance. Okay, so why you intubate a patient in neutral position and you don't put in the sniffing position as you do in adults? Why?
In adults, we do this while doing a sniffing position. We align the three oropharyngeal
but the same thing,
on the three axes.
But the same thing is not done in pediatric patients. Why? Okay, in adults, how do you align the position?
We keep a pillow of 10 centimeter below the head. Keep the neck in flexion, and head extended.
Okay, fine. So head extended and neck flexed by keeping a pillow or head ring. But the same thing is not done in pediatrics. Why?
I don't remember. There's something to do with the axes. I'm not very sure.
Basically, the occiput. Okay, the occiput of the pediatric skull is so big. Okay, so this occiput, when you make the baby to lie flat on a flat surface, what happens? This occipital prominence itself gives a natural neck flexion. Okay, first important thing you have to remember. So you doesn't need any head ring or pillow for pediatric patients. Okay, first thing, because the larger occiput gives a natural neck flexion. When you put a pillow underneath and when you try to do a neck extension and try to intubate, it is going to be more difficult because the larynx is more anterior and higher up position. Okay, when you keep a head ring and extend and try to do an intubation for a pediatric patients, it will be extremely difficult because of higher up larynx position. So that is why intubation is done in neutral position. You don't adopt sniffing position basically for this reason. The more you adopt sniffing position by keeping pillow or head ring or whatever you try, the more difficult it will be. Okay. One is large occiput, second thing is highly placed larynx. Okay, so that is why the natural neck flexion is provided by the prominence occiput. That is all is enough. When you try to keep on extend more and more, the anterior placed larynx gets more anterior from your view, so it becomes more difficult to intubate those kids. Okay, so two important reasons. One is concern with the intubation in positioning. Second thing is head is an important organ for losing temperature. Third thing is head is an important organ for looking for signs of hydration. We don't concentrate much in adults, whereas head is an important location to look for signs of dehydration in pediatric patients. Okay?
Yes.
Good, lovely. So has a normal, eyes are normal, yes, no discharge, nasal flaring of alar nasi. What do you mean by flaring of alar nasi?
That means there is some respiratory distress present for the child.
Okay, you said there is no infection, no fever, respiratory rate is 32, everything is normal. When everything be normal, why do we get a flaring of alar nasi?
When there is an obstruction in the nose, sir.
Mm. Okay, I don't know what is the reason why the baby is having flaring of alar nasi. Right. So what is the physiology behind flaring of alar nasi? What do you basically do?
Increasing the space.
Increasing the space. Anything else? So what is basically flaring of alar nasi? Or what is actually, what do you see in the baby's face when there is a flaring? Even the alar nasi is opening bigger, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so why do the babies tend to open bigger?
Because they are obligate nose breathers, sir.
Okay, they are obligate nose breathers. Until 5 months, they breathe only by nose. Agreed. So why flaring of alar nasi happens only when there is an infection or any abnormalities in the lung and the airway tract? So what the baby is trying to do basically by flaring the alar nasi?
Increasing the flow rate.
Okay, how very good. Increasing the flow rate. How come the flow rate is getting increased?
Trying to entrain more air from the.
Good. Your point is right.
Environment.
What are the physics behind that?
It is depends on the Venturi's principle, sir.
Yes, it is basically the Venturi's principle. Very good. So what happens, when you try to open the alar nasi, when you try to use this nasal muscles to open the alar nasi, what happens, you are expanding the gas space in there, right? So when the volume is expanding, what happens to the pressure there? It is going to
Drop,
drop.
sir.
Okay, so that is going to drop basically because of Boyle's law as well as the Bernoulli's principle, right? So when there is a drop in the pressure, the atmospheric air drags in more faster,
Yes, sir.
right? So that is the reason they tend to flare to increase the air speed or air flow rate into the obstructed part, which is obstructing in the lower part of the respiratory tract, and uses this alar nasi muscle as an accessory muscle to drag in more and more air as possible. Okay. Whereas alar nasi is not seen in extreme stages in adults. It's seen only in extreme stages because adults tend to have mouth breathing. Okay, they can compensate by getting the air in through their mouth. So that is why alar nasi is flaring of alar nasi is not seen until in extreme stages like end stage COPD. Okay,
Yes, sir.
so lips, no cleft lip. What is the meaning of no cleft lip?
Yes, sorry, no cleft palate. Sorry,
Okay,
sir.
no
Sorry.
cleft palate, right.
Just type in
So
mistake.
no cleft palate, no worries. So mouth, no keratosis, bleeding gums, tongue appears normal, no high arch palate or cleft palate. Okay, good. Let's move on to the next slide. No worries, leave it.
Teeth normal, neck appears normal, no clubbing, skin there's no lesions, abdomen and genitalia are normal, spine and back is normal, lower limbs are normal, no edema or lymphadenopathy seen.
Okay, fine. Next. Yeah, let's move on to the next slide.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, move on to the next slide. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, please move on to the next slide.
Hello.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, sir. I think there's some problem here.
Right, fine. Carry on, move on to the next slide.
Anthropometry, weight is 4 kg, head circumference is 41 centimeter, length is 62 centimeter, mid-arm circumference is 10 centimeter.
Okay, fine. Then
Respiratory system. Sir, hello?
yeah, tell me.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you, Dr. Nishu. Tell me.
Yes, sir. Respiratory system, upper respiratory tract, And flaring of nasal alveoli was present. No tenderness of frontal or maxillary sinus.
Okay.
Pharynx were normal. Inspection, shape of the chest is elliptical. Chest movement equal on both sides. Trachea was central. Both nipples were at the same level. Apical beads not seen, and no scarred sinuses or dilated veins were seen.
Okay.
On palpation, all inspection findings were confirmed. No tenderness, no rise in local temperature. Position of trachea was central. Chest expansion was normal. Vocal fremitus could not be elicited. All areas were resonant. No added sounds were felt. Other systems,
All normal,
CVS S1,
right?
S2 were heard normally. No murmurs had heard. GIT, no tenderness, no organomegaly. Bowel sounds were heard normally.
Okay.
CNS, no neurological deficit or no signs of meningeal irritation were seen.
Okay.
Investigation, complete blood
Right.
count,
Leobert
ECG, chest X-ray.
investigation. So based upon your history and examination, just summarize your case details and what's your diagnosis.
So this is a 4-year-old child, a 4-month-old girl weighing 4 kg with deformity of upper lip since birth. There is history of recurrent upper respiratory tract infection since 1 month, and there is no known congenital anomalies. And she is immunized up to age with no developmental delay, and she is having a deformity. So this is a case of upper lip, upper cleft lip.
Okay, so it's basically a congenital cleft lip on the left side with no any associated problems presenting for surgical correction, as simple as it is, right? Okay, fine. So it's a very simple case. Initially, we'll discuss about what are the challenges associated in this case, Dr. Nishi. What are the anesthetic challenges in these cases?
One is since this is a pediatric case, so all
Okay,
the
first
pediatric.
challenge is this is a pediatric patient. Okay, right. Next.
Second, due to airway, sir, this.
Okay, so one second thing
This.
is being a cleft lip, airway difficulties can be a possibility. Fine. So airway related issues then. What are the anesthetic challenges apart from these things? Right. So this is surgery which is going to involve shared airway with the
shared
surgeon.
airway, yes,
Shared
sir.
airway with the surgeon. Okay. And this kid being more prone for recurrent respiratory tract infection, they're going to have airway hyperreactivity. Right. So these are the things which is going to be the anesthetic challenges. The first challenge we'll discuss today is going to be the pediatric person. Okay. So we'll discuss about what are the pediatric anesthesiology challenges which you're going to face. Right. So let's start with an airway. So what are the airway issues in a pediatric compared to adults? How they are different?
Airways, they have a large floppy epiglottis.
See, when you're telling an airway abnormality or airway differences, you have to start in an orderly way, either from lung back to the nose or nose back to the lung.
So they are obligate.
Only then you'll not miss anything. Okay. So start in an orderly way. Right. First point.
They are obligate nose breathers, sir.
Obligate nose breathers until the age of 5 months, as I said earlier. So after 5 months only, the mouth breathing tend to develop. Fine. Next.
They have got a large tongue.
Okay, they got a large tongue, right? Actually, it is not a large tongue, small mouth that is causing tongue to appear large, right? Then the nasal tract is very small. Okay, the nasal pathway or the nasopharyngeal pathway, nasal pathway is going to be very small. When there is very small, even a minor narrowing can horribly increase the airway resistance. So even a minor respiratory tract infection make them to have a faster breathing, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, next.
Anterior. Yes.
Yeah.
Anterior larynx. Sir.
Coming to epiglottis, you come into the mouth, you tell about tongue, then what is the next? These babies tend to be, a 4-month baby tend to be edentulous, right? So the chances of mucosal injury when a hard handling scope is very, very common, okay?
Yes.
Okay, so edentulous kids Scopy-induced mucosal injury is common. Tongue is disproportionate to the size of the mouth. That is a more appropriate term. Don't tell it is a large tongue, right? Okay.
Yes.
So tongue is disproportionate to the size of the mouth. That will be more appropriate. Okay. Next, coming to what is below the tongue, epiglottis. Now tell me what is the difference in the epiglottis.
Epiglottis in pediatric case is large
Large,
and floppy,
large, floppy. Is there any shape described?
tongue-like shapes.
Tongue-like shape. Anything else shape you know? It is called as omega shaped or U shaped. Okay. So it is not a flat one. It is a large, floppy, omega shaped or U shaped. Do you know the angulation of epiglottis in pediatric patients?
No, sir.
It is 135 degrees. Okay. They are more obtusely angled. So which means it is going to cover the vocal cord entry much harder than the adult epiglottis. Okay. So what is the importance of this one?
Since the larynx is more anterior,
We have not come to the
Uh,
larynx at all. We are still in the epiglottis. So
sir,
what is
while,
the
int-
important?
sir, while intubating, in adults, we usually hinge the scope at the behind the epiglottis, but
What is that
we will
space
lift
called?
the epiglottis
What
while
is
in
it?
pediatric.
Where is that space
Valley.
called behind the epiglottis? What is that space? You can't tell it as a space. There's a terminology for that. Vallicular, right? So
Vallicular.
don't tell it as space, tell it as a vallicular. So in adults, you put the scope at the vallicular, which is the space between the tongue and the attachment of epiglottis to the base of the mouth or the floor of the mouth. Okay, how it is different in pediatrics?
In pediatrics, since the epiglottis is big, we lift along with the epiglottis is lifted along with the larynx.
Yeah, so because it is large, floppy, obtusely angled. So when you put the scope in the vallicula, it is difficult to lift the epiglottis to see the vocal cord opening. So that is why we prefer lifting the epiglottis in pediatric patients, basically because of this anatomically different epiglottis. So that's why we use what?
We use straight blades.
We
and
use
Miller
straight blade rather than curved McIntosh blade. So that's the reason why I
Macintosh.
use straight blade. Good. Epiglottis is over. Then coming to the larynx now.
Larynx is more anterior in pediatrics compared to adults.
Okay, more anterior than anything else in the portion of the larynx. Anything else in the position of the larynx? It is very higher up. Okay, it is high and anterior. What is the uppermost level of larynx in pediatric patients?
C4, C3, C4.
C3, C4 is adult level. Okay, it is at C2, C3, right? So larynx position, it is anterior and it is higher level, right? So what is the anatomical significance of this? What is the anesthetic significance of this one? What is the anesthetic significance of larynx being high level and anterior level?
Aspiration chances more.
No. The thing is now, when you blindly see without seeing the cord, if you keep on just looking at the epiglottis and push it inside, it will not, because in adults sometimes, if you don't see the cord, when you see the epiglottis, we can just guide below the epiglottis and push in the tube. Whereas in neonates or in pediatric patients, if you try to put the tube blindly, it goes and keeps on hitting the anterior commissure. Okay, so never ever blindly put the tube under the epiglottis. That's the first thing, because epiglottis angulation or axis and the laryngeal axis are completely different. They're not in the same axis. Okay, they're not parallel to each other. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing is, being high and anterior, the more you tend to hyperextend, the more difficult it will be. So that is another reason which I told already. Always intubate in neutral position. Never hyperextend the neck as we do in adult patients. Got the point?
Yes, sir.
So when you blind flowly, if you keep on intubating below the cords or below the epiglottis, you go and hit the anterior commission. That is going to eventually result in cord edema, right? Never do
Yes.
blind intubations. Okay, good.
Yes,
So
sir.
larynx higher up at C2 level and it is more anterior. Next difference in the airway.
Vocal cords are more
Excuse me, sir.
anterior.
Yeah,
So something about laryngeal breaking in newborn.
laryngeal.
Breaking.
No, I haven't. I haven't heard this, mate. I don't know how significant it is. I haven't heard. More probably I'll refer and tell you back.
Okay, sir.
Right. Good. Yeah, let's come back. Oh, we are telling
Yes,
about.
sir.
Yeah, come on.
Yes. And the vocal cords are more anterior and slanting, sir.
More slanting, more anterior. Fine then.
Ariepiglottic folds are thicker, so
Okay.
it is difficult to fix the laryngoscope blade.
Okay.
And tracheal cartilages are more soft,
Oh, miss the most important
easily
point.
collapsible.
Miss the most important point. Leave over the cartilage. Next. When you come to the vocal cord, next most important point. This is very vital point. They expect you from you in exam. That's why I said come in an orderly way. You said larynx is over, cords is over. What is next to the cords?
Subglottic areas.
Yeah, that's the next. That should be the next focus. No, you're going to the tracheal cartilage.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why. See, always start in an order, proceed in an order, so that you don't miss anything. Okay, what is the importance of subglottis?
The subglottic area is more funneled, and it is
Subglottic area is more funnel. Is it the right terminology?
it's funneled. It's funneled in pediatrics, sir.
Okay, funnel shaped
Subglottic.
larynx. Funnel shaped larynx. Okay, not subglottis. Okay, so why it is funnel shaped? Why it is funnel shaped?
I don't know, sir.
Because the subglottis is more narrower than the vocal cord, as simple as it is. All right. In adults, the vocal cord is a narrow segment, whereas in pediatric patients, it is the subcaudal junction, or the subglottic junction, or the cricoid junction is narrowest part. So that is why you get broader vocal cord level, much broader, whereas subglottic region getting much narrower. That is why you get a funnel shape. Okay. What is the importance of subglottic being the narrowest part?
A little change in pressure.
You said subglottic is the narrowest part. What is the significance of that?
In pediatric cases, if a cuffed tube is used,
Right.
A small change in area of radius of diameter of this subglottic area can cause more increase in airway pressure as compared to that in adults.
You're not very clear with your concepts, right? No worries. So subglottic is the narrowest part. Okay. So naturally, for kids less than 8 years, you're gonna choose an uncuffed tube because subglottic being the narrowest part, it is in a circular junction. Okay. The surface area of the subglottic region is more smooth and circular. Okay. Whereas in adults, below the cords, it is an irregular surface. So when you have a smooth surface or circular surface, and when you put a cuff tube, okay, it can pass easily through the cords. Whereas when you keep the same cuff at the subcricoid junction or the subglottic junction, which is the narrowest part, and inflate the cuff, what happens, all the entire smooth part of the subglottic region is going to expose to get the pressure of the cuff. So there will be uniform circular edema all along the entire lumen of the trachea. So that produces an horrible increase in the airway resistance post-extubation. Whereas in adults, the subvocal cord junction is irregular. When you put an uncuffed tube for an adult, what happens is there will be a lot of leak. Whereas cuff tube is much more accommodated, much better because of irregular surface, whatever the cuff pressure we exert is not uniformly getting exerted on all the part of trachea. Only a part of trachea is going to be exposed to that cuff pressure. Do you understand the point?
Yes, sir.
right? So subgracoid is a narrowish part, and it is also most circular and smooth part. So because of this reason, when you put a cuff tube, the cuff pressure could be exerted on the narrowest part, and that can cause uniform edema all through the entire lumen of the trachea. So that is why less than 8 years of age, we prefer using an uncuffed tubes. But the current terminology is changing. Nowadays, what they tell is when you have a kid whose pediatric size or the tube size is going more than 4. If you have a kid where you can use more than 4 size tube, you can go for either cuff tube or uncuffed tube. There's been huge database study which clearly tells that cuff tube doesn't increase the incidence of laryngeal edema or the tracheal edema after the procedure. Okay. But for the exam sake, you can tell that less than 8 years, being subgracoid being the narrowest junction, I would prefer putting an uncuffed tube. Do you understand the point of?
Yes, sir.
So reasons, subgracoid narrowest and it is smooth and circular. Okay. Right. Let's move down beyond. Other guys, can you unmute and tell me whether you understood this point?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right. Okay. Put your mics on mute. We can proceed. So what is the next anatomical difference in the airway?
The tracheal cartilages, sir.
Okay.
Tracheal cartilages are more soft, easily collapsible.
Okay, easily collapsible. It is not that significant. Is there anything in the trachea? Anything important?
Shorter trachea, sir. Length of trachea is reduced
Okay,
compared
length of trachea is reduced, so endobronchial intubation chances is more. Then anything more important than that for an anesthetist? The mucosal wall. Okay, the mucosal epithelium is very, very loosely attached in the tracheal wall. All right. So what happens is, since the mucosal epithelium is loosely attached, it creates a potential space in the subepithelial layer to have a fluid accumulation. That is why even a minor trauma secondary to cuff or any other thing or airway instrumentation, post-extubation, because of fluid accumulation and loosely attached epithelium, tend to produce tracheal edema, much more common, or the laryngeal edema or vocal cord edema, much more common in neonates. Okay.
Okay.
Because of loosely attached epithelium. And next comes the length of the trachea. Okay, so length of trachea is smaller, so naturally the chances of having endobronchial intubation is more even if you move the tube by 0.5 centimeters plus or minus. Okay, right. What is next then?
Bronchi are more horizontally angulated, sir.
Bronchi are more horizontally angulated. Is it true or anything else?
Both bronchi at equal angles, left and right.
That is more important. Okay. Okay. Normally, what is the angulation of right bronchi in adults?
Right is more horizontal than left, sir.
It is, don't tell it is a horizontal. Horizontal is entirely different
Yes.
meaning. Okay. Tell more in line with the
less
trachea.
acute.
Okay. It is less acutely angled and lies more in line with the trachea. Okay. At an angle of 25 degrees. Right. So it has an angle of 25 degrees with main trachea. Whereas when you compare in the right bronchi, left bronchi is 40 degrees. It is more acutely angled. Okay. So the chances of endobronchial intubation more likely on the right side bronchus in adults, mainly because right side bronchi is bigger, it is less angulated, and it is more in line with the trachea. Whereas in pediatric patients, both the bronchi tend to be at an angle of 45 degrees. Okay, it has got equal angulation. So endobronchial intubation can happen on either way. So both left side
Yes,
as well as right side endobronchial intubations are very common in pediatric patients. Fine. So we started from the nose. We spoke about tongue. And we spoke about epiglottis. We spoke about laryngeal position. Then we came to the cords, then subglottic region, then trachea, and now we are at the bronchial angulations. Okay, fine.
Yes, sir.
Next anatomical difference.
Diaphragm is more higher.
Oh, in between bronchi and the diaphragm, there is a huge organ there. What is next to the bronchi?
Respiratory bronchial.
Respiratory bronchial, alveoli, so many things that they know. What is there the anatomical difference in the alveoli?
They're less in number.
Okay,
less,
as I said already,
less,
they're less in number,
less compliant.
less compliant. Okay, what do you mean by the term compliance?
Change in volume with change in pressure, sir.
Change in lung volume per unit change in pressure. Okay, right. So in literally, it is the ability to stretch, right? Say when, for example, when you blow a balloon, right? When you give a sufficient amount of pressure, it is going to get blown up, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that ability to stretch is compliance. Okay, exactly opposite is elastance. Okay, ability to retain back its original structure, that is called as the elastance, right? So when you compare a soap bubble and an alveoli, right? So a soap bubble and a balloon taken in two hands, which has got a high compliance, soap bubble or balloon?
Balloons.
Just imagine what I told for compliance. It is ability to stretch,
To stretch.
which has got a very high compliance, balloon or soap bubble. Compliant means ease to stretch, ability to stretch, which will stretch more easily.
A bubble.
Yeah, naturally, soap bubble is going to stretch more easily, isn't it? So the soap bubble has got a high compliance compared to a balloon, right? Which has got a high elastance.
Balloons.
Balloon, because balloon can regain its structure very fast, because a soap bubble hasn't got that much elasticity. So that's why soap bubble has got a high compliance and low elastance. Balloon has got a low compliance and high elastance. So one day, why I compared these two things, because then only you can understand when you compare the same thing with a lung. Whenever you're telling the compliance is poor, compliance is poor, which means the alveoli are not a good organs to stretch better in neonates. That's what I come to say. Okay. Alveoli are not a good stretching organs compared to adults. Okay, they're not a good balloons compared to adults, right? When you can compare the take alveoli of the neonates as a balloon, and we can take the alveoli of adult as a soap bubble. Okay, so that is more compliant. This is less compliant. That is more low elastance. This has got an high elastance. Okay, right. So compliance is very poor. Second thing, number of alveoli is less. More of connective tissue, they don't stretch. Because of less number of alveoli, more connective tissue, the surface area available is going to get reduced. Okay, so this is anatomical difference in the alveoli. Next comes to diaphragm. Okay, what is the anatomical difference in the diaphragm?
It is more higher in
More
pediatrics.
higher, okay. More higher than the muscle fibers, okay? The type of muscle fibers, basically. It has got less number of fatigue resistant fibers or the oxidative fibers. It has got more reducing fibers, which means which can work fast but tend to get tired more easily, okay? This type of muscle fibers tend to have low mitochondria. So they don't have enough capacity to resist fatigability. Whereas the type 1 muscle fibers are also called as oxidative muscle fibers. They tend to have more mitochondria. They can generate more energy. They are fatigue resistant, okay? This type of muscle fibers are lesser in pediatric diaphragm. Next anatomical difference.
Ribs are horizontal.
Ribs are horizontal, so the chest wall is more circular than compared to adults. The ribs are more circular. So because of circular arrangement of ribs, the bucket handle movement is lost. So they can't accommodate or help the lungs to expand much higher. And they're highly compliant, which means they can't give extra bit of energy for the kid to expand the lungs. Okay. Good. So these are this much anatomical difference are there starting from nose to chest wall. Physiological differences we spoke already. Okay, like
Yes.
low FRC, increased ventilation, increased oxygen demand, and respiratory rate is more. Tidal volume is fixed. Metabolic rate is high. So these are the physiological respiratory changes, anatomical respiratory changes we discussed now. Okay, coming to the cardiovascular system, what is the cardiac output for a neonate? Any questions in the respiratory system so far? Other guys? Any questions in the respiratory system?
No, sir.
Okay, fine. Let's move on to the cardiovascular system. Yes, Dr. Nishi, are you here?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right.
Mhm.
So in what is the cardiac output in ml per kg per minute for a neonate? Hello?
Um, I don't know, sir.
Right. It is 300 to 400 ml per kg per minute. Okay. Right. So that's the cardiac output for a neonate. 300 ml to 400 ml per kg per minute. And we spoke why the heart rate is very high, because stroke volume is fixed. Cardiac muscles has got only connective tissues, no contractile tissues. The heart has to naturally depend upon the faster working rate to maintain the cardiac output. So since the stroke volume is fixed, these babies, they don't respond properly to hypovolemia, and they can't tolerate also the hyperolemia. So they tend to have very narrow margin of safety when it comes to the volume status, because when there is hypovolemic, the sympathetic system has to compensate in adults, whereas in pediatric patients, sympathetic system is not completely developed. So that is the reason why the babies tend to poorly respond to hypovolemia. Instead of being tachycardia, reflex tachycardia, they go for bradycardia, because any insult to the body, they predominantly present as parasympathetic nervous system stimulation, basically because sympathetic nervous system is not completely developed. It takes 8 to 12 years to develop completely. Good. That is with respect to the cardiovascular system. Can you tell me what is abnormality in the renal system? What are the
Renal
physiological changes? Sorry, not abnormality.
Yes, sir. They have a reduced GFR and tubular reabsorption, sir.
Okay.
So they tend to lose salts more, obligatory salt losers,
Okay.
and they have reduced drug elimination.
Okay. So first thing is their ability to handle high solutes is very poor. Okay. So when they're using a large amount of sodium is lost in the urine, adult nephrons tend to conserve as much as electrolytes, right? So that ability to conserve the electrolytes is very poor. So that is the reason why they tend to lose salt very often obligatorily. Second thing, their ability to respond to hypovolemia, water conserving capacity is very poor. Okay, they tend to lose water more. So that is why they urinate very frequently, because the ADH receptors are not well developed to conserve the water. So concentrating ability as well as reabsorption capacity is very poor. So the drugs which depends upon the tubular secretion tend to get accumulated, right? Like opioids like pethidine. So these drugs are depends upon the, or some antibiotics like penicillin depends upon the renal tubular excretion or secretion. So when the tubular secretion is affected, what happens? These drugs tend to get accumulated. Okay, so that is the renal difference. Any difference in the metabolic capacity in the liver?
They have got immature enzyme system, sir. So there
Okay.
is
What about the
increased
phase one?
duration of action of drugs.
What about the phase one reactions? What are the different types of phase one metabolic reactions? What are the different types of phase one metabolic reactions in the liver? So it's nothing but oxidation, reduction, and hydrolysis. Okay. So these are the phase one reactions. Phase two reactions are glucuronidation and sulfation and conjugation. Okay. So these are the phase two reactions. So the phase two reactions are enzyme dependent. The phase two reactions are completely underdeveloped or immature in neonates. Whereas phase one reactions relatively are in a much matured state for a newborn kid. Okay. The hydrolysis is completely matured or as matured as an adult. Okay. Reduction and oxidation takes little bit time to get matured, whereas hydrolysis is completely mature at the time of birth. Conjugation reactions are completely immature. So what is the anesthetic significance of this?
Increase free drug.
Increased free drug. Okay. So the drugs which are to be conjugated in the liver are not able to undergo proper conjugation to become water soluble and get excreted. So that naturally what happened tend to accumulate. So all the lipid soluble drugs excretion will be very poor, particularly when they are dependent upon the conjugation of the hepatic enzymes. Then
Yes.
unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia. Okay, that is very common in neonates because it is not conjugated to conjugated hyperbilirubin to get excreted as a water soluble molecule. So that is why you get in neonates what?
Jaundice.
Jaundice. A severe form of that we call them as kernicterus. Okay.
Kernicterus.
Kernicterus. So that when there is high unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia, they tend to cross the blood-brain barrier, which is also immature in neonates. So that can cause neural damage and resulting in kernicterus. So any lipid soluble drug which has to become polar in the liver tend to get delayed excretion. Second thing is the albumin level is not that good. So the free volume, free concentration of those drugs is very high. What is the volume of distribution? What will be the volume of distribution in pediatric patient? It will be high, low, or normal compared to adults. Or
It
equal
will be
to adults.
high.
Okay, so
high.
it will be high. Why?
More
Blood
intravascular.
volume is
Blood volume is
more in pediatric case, sir. It is around for neonates. It's around 90 ml per kg.
okay. So that's a
At
basic
the-
reason. Okay, so their extracellular fluid volume is much higher. Okay, so for adults, what is the normal intracellular fluid volume in liters? Okay, what is the total body water in liters in adults?
42 liters, sir.
42 liters. How much is intracellular? How much is extracellular?
28 is intracellular and the rest is
14 is
14.
extracellular. Right, good.
Yes.
So 40% is intracellular in adults, 20% of the total body water is extracellular, whereas it is exactly paradox in a neonate. Okay, they predominantly tend to be 40% the extracellular fluid volume, and plasma volume or blood volume is one part of extracellular fluid volume. Okay, as the kids grow, as the cells get more and more hyperplastic, more and more cells are produced, the intracellular volume goes up and the extracellular volume comes down. So since they have a high extracellular fluid volume, the volume of distribution is going to be more high. So how important it is for an anesthetist, Dr. Nishu?
They need an increased higher induction dose, sir.
Yes, the loading dose
And-
of drug or the bolus dose of drugs particularly is going to be very high because of larger volume of distribution. Okay, very good. Excellent. So these are the major pediatric differences. When coming to the temperature regulation, how different it is from adults and pediatric patient?
It's this non.
Okay, in other terms, you can get in the exam like why the babies are more prone for hypothermia. Now tell me the answer for this.
One reason is that their head to body surface area is more.
Okay, so that naturally when there is large body surface area, they tend to lose more heat. Fine, then.
They have non-shivering thermogenesis, sir.
The question is why they become more hypothermic. That is the question. One reason, as I said, large head to body surface area ratio. Fine. Next.
Immature thermostat.
Immature thermostat. Fine. Immature brain. So immature thermoregulation in the brain. Fine. Next.
Less subcutaneous fat.
Good. Less subcutaneous fat. Okay. These babies have less subcutaneous fat. Fat is a good insulation. Okay. So when there's less subcutaneous fat, they tend to lose more heat easily. Fine. Next. What are the reasons we spoke? Immature brain, large surface area, less subcutaneous fat. Then
Less brown fat.
less
More
brown fat.
brown.
No. Three reasons we spoke. Some other reasons. Some important reasons.
globular body.
Globular body means
Major portion of body mass in their torso compared to adult.
okay, so that is going to naturally increase the surface area, which we spoke already about that. Anything else? Something different?
Natural
Increase minute
compensator
ventilation.
mechanisms.
Sorry?
Natural
Increase minute
compensator.
ventilation.
Increase minute ventilation. One at a time, please. Yes, increase minute ventilation. Okay. How it is going to produce hypothermia?
It causes more heat loss,
More heat loss in what way?
airway heat loss.
Yes, good. Very, very important. Okay. In adults, it doesn't matter much, whereas in pediatric, it is very important. Okay. So when there is, since these kids tend to have high minute ventilation because of rapid air current exchange, every time they're going to get intake the unhumidified air. So when they try to humidify, they put when the gases dried, unhumidified or unwarmed air gets into the body trying to humidify as well as heat those gases. So what happened when they try to heat those gases because of rapid minute ventilation, they tend to lose temperature very fast because of increased minute ventilation. Very good. Then, so respiratory heat loss is very, very vital in pediatric patients. So I spoke about immature brain, thin subcutaneous fat, large surface area, then minute ventilation loss. Then the ability to shiver is very poor. Okay, so we spoke about heat loss mechanism. Then you have to speak about heat conserving mechanisms. What are the heat conserving mechanisms which are poorly developed compared to adults?
Vasoconstriction.
Okay, the vasoconstriction response may because sympathetic system is not well developed. Okay, so that is one reason why they don't conserve heat properly. Then no ability to shiver. Okay, so shivering is a behavioral response in adults. Okay, whereas the kids they don't tend to shiver, so the shivering mechanism is lost. So that is another reason why they not able to produce heat. Then behavioral response, right? Say when you feel cold, what do? You go and put a bed sheet on your body, isn't it? You go and take a bed sheet and cover yourself. So that response, the cortical response, is a behavioral response to the thermostat from the upper cortex. So those behavioral response is lost, so they're not able to conserve heat. So these are the different mechanisms why they tend to, or different reasons why they tend to be hypothermic. Unmute and tell me whether I've understood all the points.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right, so many mechanisms there. One way they're losing heat, one way they're not able to conserve heat. So these two together accumulated make them more prone for hypothermia. What is the physiological mechanism in pediatric patients to conserve heat or to produce heat, Dr. Nishu?
They have got more amount of brown fat.
Okay,
which
what
has
is
got
brown fat
more,
basically?
which has got more mitochondria, and they produce more of ATP and heat generation. That is called non-shivering thermogenesis.
Okay, that is called non-shivering thermogenesis, right? So how the heat is generated there?
So they have got this brown fat is brown in color because of increased mitochondria in the muscle fibers, and that produces more of ATP, sir.
Okay, is it through the ATP which is causing more heat or something else?
So oxidative phosphatase.
See, when you produce ATP, you don't produce heat. Only when
Energy,
you break down,
sir.
only when you break down ATP, you produce heat.
Yes, sir.
Right? How come the increased mitochondria or the brown fat is producing heat?
Beta oxidation of fatty acids.
Yes, basically the fatty acids are broken down. Okay, there is lipolysis, right? So the energy for lipolysis is produced by the ATP. So since there are large amount of mitochondria, this ATP is frequently generated more by those increased mitochondria. This ATP is a feeding factor for lipolysis. So increased lipolysis only when there is a breakdown product that generates heat and water. Okay, so lipolysis of macro fatty acid molecules into glycerol and monounsaturated fatty acids, so that in the process of breaking down the fats, you get large amount of heat. So for this reaction to happen, you need ATP that is provided by the high amount of mitochondria in the brown fat. Okay, where are they located in the body?
One in between the scapula, sir. One place.
Okay.
Nape of neck.
Okay, nape of the
over
neck,
the adrenals,
nape of the neck,
nape of-
interscapular region, adrenal region, over the top of the adrenal glands. Okay, and kidneys.
Axilla.
So this is where you have the high amount of brown fat. Right. I think we have discussed the majority of pediatric anesthesiology concerns. Any questions in this so far? So you should be knowing.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
When is the brain development completes, sir, in a pediatric population?
Brain development is a vague term. It is you mean the neurological development, neuronal development, or sympathetic system, or respiratory system, or so many things. Okay, each mature at different stages, right? For example, sympathetic system completely matures at the age of 12. Okay. Similarly, hypothalamus takes at least 1.5 years to 2 years. So each part of the brain, each respiratory center develops at different stages of body growth. Okay. It is not completely all of a focus all together, they get matured completely. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Any questions in the pediatric physiology concern? So you should be knowing the questions. Why, what is the airway differences in pediatric patients? You should be knowing what are the physiological differences in the respiratory system and other systems as we discussed, like cardiovascular, respiratory system, renal system, liver, and temperature regulation. Okay, those things you have to be remembered. Then you should be in a position to answer why the kids tend to desaturate faster. Then you should be in a position to answer why the kids tend to get faster inhalation induction. Answers are same, questions will be different, right? Why the babies tend to get fatigue more soon, why the babies tend to have faster inhalation induction, why the babies are not put in spontaneous ventilation, why they have to put in controlled ventilation. Questions are all different, answer is only the physiological difference. Do you understood what I'm telling?
Yes, sir.
Right? So just be prepared for any physiological questions in unit, which is going to get in an exam, not only particularly the cleft lip, any pediatric case, they may definitely expect you to have a basic knowledge about the pediatric physiology. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Right. So next we'll move on to the anesthetic management. Can we do it now or tomorrow?
So we can do today only.
Tomorrow, sir.
Tomorrow morning, are you all fine? Evening, I'm on call tomorrow, so I'll not be free.
Yes, sir. Morning is
Any-
fine.
Morning is fine, sir.
Just anesthetic management, it will finish in 1 hour.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes,
sir.
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 Morning.
Morning, sir.
Tomorrow
From-
morning, we'll have at around 9:30.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Okay.
9:30 to 10:30. Okay, 1 hour we'll finish it off.
Okay, sir.
All right, very good, Dr. Nishu. Thank you very much, guys. We'll catch you
Thank
up tomorrow again.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.